I was rewiring a busted outlet when the power flickered and went dead. The shop went quiet except for the hum of the old fridge in the back and my own breathing. That's when my phone buzzed on the counter. Once. Twice. Like it didn't want to interrupt me. I wiped my hands on a rag and glanced at the screen. My son's name. I almost smiled. Here's the thing about being a father like me. You don't keep a ledger. You don't count nights or dollars or favors. You just do what needs doing. That's how I raised him. Fixing things. Making ends meet. Pretending it was easy so he wouldn't worry. If you asked me what I expected in return, I'd tell you the truth. Nothing. Not applause, not gratitude. Just that he'd be okay. "Dad," he said when I answered, voice calm, polite. The way people sound when they've already decided something. "Can you come by tonight? I need you to sign something." I told him sure, of course. That word, of course, has carried me through a lifetime. I locked up the shop early. The sun was dropping behind the strip mall, turning the windows gold. This place wasn't much. Peeling sign, concrete floor, a jar of loose change by the register. But it fed us. It paid for school shoes and bus passes and nights when dinner was eggs because payday was still 2 days away. I shut the lights off and didn't look back. Fathers don't linger over what they've already given. His place was bright. Clean lines, glass table, no photos on the walls. He poured water but didn't drink it. I noticed his hands first, steady, manicured. Not the hands of a man who ever had to fix his own mistakes. He slid an envelope across the table like it might bite him if he held it too long. "Just read it," he said. The paper inside was heavy, official, the kind that smells like ink and certainty. I read the first line, then the second. My eyes went back to the top like they were trying to correct a mistake. "Dad, I'm not your son." The room didn't spin. That surprised me. What I felt wasn't anger. It was a quiet pressure behind my ribs, like something essential had been unplugged. I looked at him. He didn't look away. "This is for work," he added. "It simplifies things." I nodded, because nodding is what men like me do when we're trying to understand without making noise. My mind ran backward through time. Through mornings I taught him to tie his shoes. Through scraped knees I cleaned with tap water. Through the night I sold my truck so he could finish a semester. Funny how memory shows up uninvited when the present stops making sense. I folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. "What do you need me to sign?" I asked. He exhaled, relieved. "There's more," he said. "It's standard." Standard. That word sat there, smug and smooth. I didn't sign anything that night. I didn't argue either. I drove home with the windows down, the city air loud and ordinary, and tried to tell myself this was just paperwork, that it didn't change who I was. But the truth crept in anyway. A man can give everything and still be asked to erase himself. I unlocked my shop, sat on the stool by the counter, and listened to the fridge hum again. Somewhere between that sound and the ticking clock, I understood something I'd never planned to learn. Some debts don't come with receipts. Some betrayals don't shout. They arrive folded neatly, asking for your signature. And if you're not careful, you sign away more than paper. This isn't a revenge story, not yet. It's the moment before one begins, when a father realizes that the cost of being quiet might be everything he has left. He didn't rush me. That was the strangest part. After I folded the paper and slid it back into the envelope, my son just sat there, hands wrapped around his glass, waiting. No apology, no explanation. Like this was a formality we both understood. Like the words I just read were no heavier than a utility bill. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said, finally. His tone was calm, professional. The same voice he used with clients. "But I'll need it soon." I nodded again. That reflex was still working, even if my chest felt hollow. I stood, thanked him for the water I hadn't touched, and walked out without another word. He didn't follow me to the door. On the drive home, the sentence kept replaying in my head. "Dad, I'm not your son." Not yelled, not thrown. Typed. Clean. Permanent. I waited for anger to show up, but it didn't. What came instead was something quieter and worse. A slow inventory of moments I'd never written down because I never thought I'd need proof. The night I taught him to ride a bike behind the shop, running until my lungs burned. The winter I worked 12-hour days because his coat didn't fit anymore. The envelope of cash I slid across the table years ago and told him not to worry about paying back. If you're listening to this and you're a parent, especially a father, you know what I mean. You don't keep receipts for love. You just assume it counts. At home, I set the envelope on the kitchen table and made coffee I didn't drink. The clock ticked. The fridge hummed. Ordinary sounds doing their best to keep the world normal. I opened the envelope again, slower this time. The page was neat. Legal language, clean margins. My name typed correctly. That almost made me laugh. I called a friend who'd done some paralegal work years back. I didn't explain everything. I just asked a question. "If someone signs something saying they're not related," I said, "what does that make them?" There was a pause on the line. "Legally?" he asked. "A stranger." I hung up and sat there longer than I meant to. Stranger. It was such a small word for such a big eraser. The next morning, my son texted, "Did you read the rest?" I typed back, "Yes." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. "We can talk later," he wrote. "It's just paperwork." Paperwork. I stared at the screen and thought about how many times I'd filled out forms for him. School, insurance, doctors, writing father without thinking. How that word had never asked me for permission. I went down to the shop and tried to work. My hands knew what to do, but my head lagged behind. Every outlet I fixed felt temporary. Every switch clicked like a question. Around noon, a regular came in and joked about how kids these days don't appreciate anything. I smiled, because smiling is easier than explaining. Here's where I'll ask you something. Not because I need an answer, but because it matters. If your child handed you a piece of paper like that, would you read it again? Or would you pretend it was just ink and move on? Sit with that for a second. I did. That evening, I laid the envelope flat and noticed something I'd missed before. A second page, smaller print, attachments listed, terms I didn't recognize. I didn't feel panic yet, just a tightening, like the air before a storm. I hadn't lost my son in a fight. I hadn't lost him to distance or time. I was losing him to procedure. And I was starting to understand that the paper wasn't asking who I was to him. It was asking what I was worth. He chose the place. That alone should have told me something. We didn't meet at my shop. We didn't meet at his apartment. He picked a cafe I'd never been to. Glass walls, pale wood tables, music low enough to sound expensive. The kind of place where people talked softly about big numbers. He arrived early. Laptop open, phone face down. Everything arranged. "Dad," he said, standing just long enough to be polite. Thanks for coming. I sat across from him. My chair wobbled slightly, and he reached out without thinking, nudging it until it was steady. That small habit, fixing things before they tipped, hit me harder than the envelope had. I wondered where he'd learned it. "I don't want this to get emotional," he said. He didn't sound cold, just prepared. "So I'll be clear." I waited. "This isn't about you doing something wrong," he continued. "It's about optics, background checks, investors. They don't like complications." "Complications," I repeated. He nodded. "Family history, financial exposure, public records. It's cleaner if I'm independent." There it was. Clean, simple, reasonable. He said it like a man explaining a budget cut, not like a son erasing his father. I looked around the cafe. A couple at the window laughed quietly. A barista wiped down the counter in slow circles. No one was listening. No one needed to. This kind of conversation didn't raise voices. "So this paper," I said, tapping the envelope between us. "It makes things clean." "Yes." He didn't hesitate. "It removes ambiguity." Ambiguity. I thought about the years I'd driven him to school before dawn. The nights I'd stayed up fixing a breaker so the lights would come back on. There was nothing ambiguous about any of that. But I could see now how memory doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. "I didn't ask for much," I said, not accusing, just stating a fact. "I didn't ask for anything back." "I know," he replied quickly, "and I appreciate that, truly." Appreciate. The word landed wrong, like a tip left on a table after a long meal. "This isn't personal," he added, as if that helped. "It's just business." Business. I nodded again. That reflex still hadn't learned its lesson. He slid his laptop an inch closer, not opening it, just anchoring himself to something solid. I noticed how his hands didn't shake. "If you sign," he said, "everything moves forward. If you don't, it complicates things." "For who?" I asked. He paused, just a beat. "For me." There it was again. Clean honesty. No shouting, no cruelty. Just a truth delivered with good posture. I picked up the envelope and turned it over in my hands. Thick paper, crisp edges. It felt heavier than it should have. "And if I don't sign," I said, "what happens to us?" He looked at me then, really looked, like he was searching for the right phrasing. "Nothing has to change," he said carefully. "This doesn't affect our relationship." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. We finished our coffees without drinking them. He checked his watch. A meeting. Always another meeting. We stood. He reached for my shoulder, then thought better of it and dropped his hand. "Take your time," he said, "but don't take too long." Outside, the air felt sharper. I watched him walk away, confident, unburdened. A man who believed the past could be trimmed like excess fat. I stood there a moment longer, envelope under my arm, and understood something that took 60 years to sink in. He wasn't ashamed of me. I was just inconvenient. And for the first time, the thought settled in my chest, heavy and clear. A son who can explain away a father will eventually find a price for him, too. The notary's office smelled like toner and lemon cleaner. Everything in it was beige, walls, carpet, the woman behind the desk who smiled the same way at everyone. Neutral. Safe. The kind of place where nothing personal was supposed to happen. My son arrived 5 minutes late and apologized once, softly, like it was a habit. He shook hands with the notary, nodded to the witness, and took the chair beside me. He didn't look nervous. That should have been my second warning. "I highlighted where you need to sign," he said, sliding the stack toward me. The paper was thick, heavy in a way that felt deliberate. I skimmed the first page. Names, dates, addresses. The language was clean and exact, the kind that doesn't invite questions. I recognized my name spelled right, my birth date correct to the day. That detail brought a strange comfort, like being seen, even if it was only on paper. "Any questions?" the notary asked, pen poised. I shook my head. Fathers like me don't like to slow things down. We're trained to believe that hesitation costs more than trust. I signed where he pointed. Once. Twice. The pen scratched softly, a sound that felt louder than it should have. My son exhaled, just a little. Relief, not gratitude. "There's an attachment," the notary added, tapping the stack. "Standard language." "Standard," my son echoed, already gathering his coat. I didn't read the attachment. That was my mistake. Not because I was careless, because I was tired. Tired of being the obstacle. Tired of being the thing that complicated his clean lines. I told myself it was fine. Paperwork always looks worse than it is. We stepped outside into the afternoon light. He checked his phone immediately, thumbs moving fast. Business. Always business. "Thank you," he said, then corrected himself. "I mean, it helps." I nodded, that reflex again. I watched him walk away, confident, unburdened, like a man who'd just closed a deal. I stood there a moment longer, the envelope tucked under my arm, and felt the quiet satisfaction of having done my part. That feeling didn't last. At home, I set the papers on the kitchen table and made dinner for one. Halfway through, I went back to the stack. Not because I was worried, but because something in my chest wouldn't settle. I turned to the attachment. The words were smaller, denser. They didn't greet you kindly. They assumed you knew what you were doing. No familial relationship recognized. No claim to shared assets. No right to contest, appeal, or inherit. I read it twice, then a third time, slower. The room felt thinner, like the air had been negotiated away. I called the same friend as before. I didn't soften it this time. "If someone signs this," I asked, "what happens to their house?" Silence. Then, "If it's referenced elsewhere, it can be transferred. Cleanly." Cleanly. There it was again. I sat down and pressed my palms to the table. The wood was cool, steady. I thought about the shop, the tools, the small house I'd paid down dollar by dollar. I thought about how easy it was to erase a man if you labeled him correctly. It wasn't anger that came then. It was clarity. The paper hadn't asked whether I was his father. It had already decided I wasn't. All it needed was my name to make it true. I folded the attachment back into the stack, careful this time. I didn't tear it. I didn't burn it. I just set it down and listened to the clock tick. For the first time, I understood the shape of what was happening. This wasn't about pride or distance or even love. It was about utility, about converting a lifetime of giving into something transferable. And in that quiet kitchen, with the notary's ink drying on my signature, I realized something that changed the weight of every memory that came before it. I hadn't been cut loose. I had been prepared for sale. The call came just after dawn, the kind that doesn't let the phone finish its first ring. I answered it standing barefoot in the kitchen, yesterday's papers still spread across the table like a bad hand. "Dad," my son said. His voice wasn't calm this time. It was tight, efficient. "There's been an accident." For a second, the words didn't find their place. Then he said her name, and everything else fell away. The hospital was already awake when I got there. Wheels squeaking, voices clipped, the smell of disinfectant sharp enough to sting. I found him in the corridor outside the imaging room, jacket off, sleeves rolled, pacing like a man with a deadline. He stopped when he saw me, relief flashing across his face so quickly I almost missed it. "She's stable," he said. "They're running tests." I nodded, hands in my pockets, trying to keep them still. Through the glass, I could see a small body on a bed, wrapped in wires and blankets that looked too big for her. Machines hummed, steady and indifferent. "It was a fall," he added. "Stairs. These things happen." They do. I knew that. I also knew the way children fall, and the way adults describe it afterward. The difference is usually in the eyes. He didn't meet mine. A nurse came out with a clipboard. Numbers, codes, words that sounded clinical until they didn't. "We'll need consent for a few things," she said, "and we should talk about billing." My son stepped in smoothly. "I'll handle it." We moved to a quieter corner. He pulled his phone out, already scrolling. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "This is going to be expensive. Imaging, overnight observation, maybe more." "How much?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough to make it feel rehearsed. "Around 180. 180,000, I said. He shook his head. "No, 180. Total. I can cover some, but..." He glanced toward the room, then back to me. "I need things settled today." There it was, the urgency, the narrowing of options. He reached into his bag and produced the envelope. Same paper, same weight. "If we finalize the documents," he said, "I can move funds faster. It clears the path." I looked at the envelope, then at the door where a nurse was adjusting a monitor near her bed. The machine beeped, regular as a metronome, time keeping its own rules. "This isn't the moment," I said. "It is," he replied, not unkindly. "That's the point." I wanted to argue. I wanted to ask why paperwork was suddenly stitched to a child's pain. Instead, I felt the old reflex rise. Protect first, question later. Fathers learn it early. It saves time. Sometimes it costs everything else. "If I sign," I said slowly, "you can pay?" "Yes." "And if I don't?" He didn't answer right away. The hallway felt narrower. "Then it gets complicated," he said. "Delays, approvals. We can't afford delays." I thought about the word afford, how it had followed me my whole life. I thought about how quickly care becomes leverage when someone knows where to press. A doctor appeared, asked a few questions, reassured us in the careful language of probabilities. When he left, my son leaned closer. "Dad," he said, softer now. "Please, I'm trying to take care of this." I looked through the glass again. Her chest rose and fell. Small, determined. I didn't take the pen. Not yet. I tucked the envelope under my arm, the way you do with something fragile, and said the only thing I could say without breaking something inside me. "Get her what she needs," I said. "We'll talk after." He nodded, but his eyes didn't thank me. They calculated. As he walked away to make calls, I stayed where I was, listening to the machines and the distant wheels. In that hallway, I understood the new shape of the bargain. Urgency had a price, and love was being used as collateral. The paper wasn't just waiting for my signature anymore. It was waiting for my fear. Hospitals have a way of stretching time until it feels thin enough to tear. By the second night, the lights never really went off, just dimmed into a pale, tired glow. I sat in the plastic chair by the window, jacket folded on my lap, watching the hallway reflect back a version of me I barely recognized. My son stood near the nurse's station, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. He kept pacing the same short line of tiles. Like if he stayed inside that rectangle, nothing bad could reach him. Every few minutes he glanced my way, checking whether I was still where he'd left me. Like a document he hadn't finished filing. The doctor came by with careful updates. Stable, monitoring, no sudden changes. The words were meant to calm, but they didn't touch the knot in my chest. When the doctor left, my son turned to me, already mid-sentence. "If we move quickly," he said, "this doesn't have to turn into a long-term problem." "A long-term problem," I repeated. He nodded. "Rehab, follow-ups, insurance negotiations. It adds up." Everything added up for him. Numbers were his language. Consequences were just columns waiting to be balanced. I didn't argue. I just listened. That was my role now. Listener, witness, background noise. I watched the way nurses moved around the room, efficient and kind, adjusting machines without asking permission. I wondered how many signatures they'd seen that day, how many lives had been reduced to forms. That's when she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then settling on me. Recognition came slowly, like a sunrise you don't notice until it's already there. "Grandpa," she whispered. I leaned forward, careful not to touch anything I shouldn't. "I'm here," I said. "You rest." She nodded, then frowned, thinking hard. Kids do that when something doesn't line up in their heads. She glanced past me toward the hallway, then back at my face. "Is Daddy mad?" she asked. "No," I said quickly. "Daddy's busy." She considered that, then reached out and tugged lightly at my sleeve. I bent closer so I could hear her. "Grandpa," she said very seriously, "if Daddy says you're not his dad, then who taught him how to tie his shoes?" The question landed in the room like a dropped tray. For a moment, no one moved. A nurse paused mid-step. My son froze where he stood, phone still in his hand, screen glowing. His mouth opened, then closed. The answer didn't come. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not joy, just a small crack where air could get in. I smiled at her, brushed a curl back from her forehead. "I did," I said softly. "A long time ago." She nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes again, already drifting. The machines resumed their steady rhythm, like nothing had happened. But something had. My son turned away, pretending to check a message that wasn't there. His shoulders were stiff, his confidence interrupted. It wasn't humiliation that crossed his face. It was inconvenience. A truth surfacing at the wrong time. I didn't press him. I didn't look at him at all. I sat back down and listened to the beeping, to the quiet hum of the building doing what it always did. Keeping people alive while they decided who they were to each other. In that moment, I understood something clearly for the first time. No paper could undo a memory that lived in muscle and habit. No signature could erase the small, unprofitable truths that children carry without knowing their weight. If you're still listening right now, let me ask you something, just between us. If a child remembered you when an adult tried to erase you, which would you trust more? The document on the table? Or the memory that doesn't know how to lie? Sit with that for a second. I did. The room went quiet again after that. Too quiet. My son didn't say another word. He didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't look at me. He just stood there, staring at the floor like he'd misplaced something he didn't want to search for. I watched him for a moment and realized this wasn't the end of anything. It was the end of pretending we were standing on the same side of the paper. I stayed with her until she fell back into a deeper sleep. When I finally stood to leave, I noticed the envelope sitting on the chair where he'd left it earlier. Still sealed. Still waiting. I didn't pick it up. Not because I was afraid of what it meant, but because, for the first time, I understood exactly what it was worth.